This report is all going to come out, and it's just going to reflect more poorly on the Attorney General if, when it does come out, and we look at the difference between what he redacted and what was under those redactions, it shows an effort to cover up or conceal either evidence of impropriety or evidence of a lack of morals or ethics or judgment, and that is shy of criminality, or in the case of obstruction of justice, is criminality.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff spoke with my colleague Rachel Maddow on Friday, issuing a warning to the Attorney General and to Donald Trump that the full Mueller report will come out. Schiff spoke soon after Attorney General William Barr announced that he will release a redacted version of the Mueller report by mid-April and that he will testify before Congress on May 1st. Barr also defended his 4-page memo characterizing the Mueller report, saying, quote, "I'm aware of some media reports and other public statements mischaracterized my March 24, 2019 supplemental notification as a summary of the special counsel's investigation. It was not. It did not purport to be an exhaustive recounting, but a summary of its principal conclusions." Joining me now is Glenn Kirshner, MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, and Charlie Pierce of Esquire. Glenn, I'm going to go to you on this first, because this Barr report, which I have here, this very brief 4-page summary of what he says are the principal conclusions in the report. What are the chances that this is an exhaustive recounting of what Robert Mueller found in what we have now learned is about a 400-page report minus the supplements and amendments?
Yeah, Joy, the chances are slim to none, and slim is fading fast. You know, look, that 4-page report, I think what was most troubling about it is when Bill Barr was relating some of Bob Mueller's conclusions, he said two things. One, he said, okay, Bob Mueller found no evidence of conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia that would warrant criminal charges. Set that aside for a moment. What was Bob Mueller's other conclusion, if we can take Barr at his word? It was that Bob Mueller could not clear the president for obstructing justice. And when you let that sink in, that is dramatic. Why? Because Bob Mueller is the king of circumspection. I mean, I learned how to be a federal prosecutor from Bob Mueller. He is not prone to hyperbole. If he, after an exhaustive 22-month investigation, concluded that the evidence could not clear or exonerate the president from committing obstruction of justice, that's pretty dramatic. But what did Bill Barr do? Bill Barr said, okay, Bob Mueller, then let me go ahead and clear him. And Joy, he tried to clear him without any supporting evidence, without any legal analysis, without any evidentiary basis. I mean, what Bill Barr did there was he poisoned the well of public opinion. And I'll tell you, he did it just as sure as if he were the water plant manager at Flint, Michigan. He poisoned the well of public opinion. But the good news, Joy, is Congress is going to get the report. The American people are going to get the report. And Bill Barr's sort of summary assertion will mean nothing at the end of the day because the evidence will speak for itself.
Right, and my understanding would be, Glenn, that the Gang of 8, meaning there are 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans who Bill Barr cannot keep from this information. He can't keep it from them. Then it's a question of what gets redacted, et cetera. But I want to just stay with you for one moment, because when my layperson's reading of the Barr report, of what he put out, his letter to Congress, it specifies 2 things that he says Mueller was looking at. One, direct assistance by or participation from the Trump campaign in the Internet Research Agency's hacking of the DNC, which I've never heard any reports of anyone saying that they did, that anyone even alleging that they did, but that he said that narrowly Mueller looked at whether or not the Trump campaign helped the Internet Research Agency in its hacking operation against the DNC and whether it participated in the dissemination of those emails by WikiLeaks. Those 2 parts of what we kind of call Russiagate. To your understanding, I mean, we don't know all of what Mueller did, but is that all that Robert Mueller was looking at?
Well, I would say, Joy, that's contrary to the May 2017 appointment letter, which set out the jurisdictional mandate, the scope, if you will, of Bob Mueller's investigation. And it was worded much more broadly than that. In the first of 3 paragraphs, it said that Bob Mueller is directed to investigate any contacts or coordination between members of the Trump campaign and Russia. That's a fairly broad mandate. So I don't understand, and I don't think any of us will ever understand until we see the full Mueller report, why Bill Barr would then try to constrict the actual scope of Bob Mueller's investigation. But what I really remain confident of is that in those 400 pages, without even counting the attachments, Bob Mueller will have done a thorough job, and we will all see what it is he found. And when he can't clear the president of obstructing justice, I suspect what he found is going to be pretty dramatic.
Yeah, one would think that if there was, if the entire report was exculpatory, it would be in the interests of Bob Barr, who is obviously an ally of the president based on the memo he wrote to get the job, the audition memo, that he would just release even an executive summary, which he didn't, just snippets of it. I want to go to you, Charlie, because let me play a couple more sound bites from Adam Schiff. This was Adam Schiff again speaking with Rachel Maddow on Friday, talking about what William Barr was required to do versus what he did.
Required by law or by the regulations. He certainly didn't need to provide that summary, non-summary. Presumably, in a 400-page report by the special counsel wrote his own summary. And there would have been nothing to preclude Bill Barr, if he wanted to give a forecast of what was to come, in releasing the summary.
And so, Charlie, I think what the concern that people have is, William Barr did write a much longer memo, a much longer memo, 19 pages, before he got the job that was circulated around Washington, in which he concluded in advance by saying that in his view of presidential power, a president cannot commit obstruction of justice, that the president is the executive branch, that he comprises, he embodies the executive branch himself, that he has that much power. Just looking at the history of William Barr and his attitude toward presidential power, should anyone have been surprised that he then concluded on his own, didn't let Congress do it, but he concluded that this president did not commit obstruction of justice?
Joy, return with us now to those thrilling days of yesteryear. There are those of us out here who are Iran-Contra obsessives, been waiting for this moment for a long time. No one should have been surprised. It was William Barr who advised President George H.W. Bush just when Lawrence Walsh was closing in on him, and just when President George H.W. Bush was leaving office, by the way, Christmas Eve of 1992, to pardon 6 of the Iran-Contra conspirators, including Caspar Weinberger, just as a 1986 campaign diary kept by then President Bush had fallen into the greedy little hands of the Iran-Contra prosecutors. And then later, earlier, when the Iraq-Gate scandal, which was about the covert arming of Saddam Hussein by successive administrations using various banking shenanigans and agricultural credits, when that broke, he was the Attorney General who declined to present a special prosecutor then. So no, I think the chief characteristic of William Barr as a government lawyer is covering for Republican presidents.
Well, and we know William Safire, the very conservative essayist and columnist back in 1992, referred to him as the cover-up general in the Iraq-Gate scandal. And I just wonder if, to just go with you, Glenn Kirshner, for a moment, setting aside whatever someone might think that this man might do, that he is a partisan, clearly. He's a Republican. He said in advance he doesn't believe that presidents can commit obstruction of justice. Could it be that William Barr simply has a view of presidential power that sets him up, right, to do just what he did, to say that in his view that this can't happen, that no matter what is in that 400-page report, just his past views on presidential power might mean that in his own view that obstruction is impossible? And if that's the case, then should he be the person deciding that rather than Congress?
No, and I think Congress will ultimately get to decide it once they see the report, probably in the setting of considering impeachment hearings. But, I think there were 2 significant hurdles to overcome if the president was ever going to be held accountable in a court of law for what he has done. One was Bill Barr's, I would say, unduly expansive view of the power of a president that he can never obstruct. I know he walked that back during the confirmation hearings, but that 19-page memo sure makes it seem like he views the president as a king who can do whatever he wants regarding firing people and pardoning people, regardless of what his intent was. So the first hurdle was that unduly expansive view of executive power. But the second, which remains, is the DOJ Office of Legal Counsel opinion that says you can't indict a sitting president. So I don't know that we were ever going to get to a place where we could haul the president into court and hold him accountable for the crimes he committed. Barr has just kind of sealed that fate. But I don't think Barr's opinion that, hey, I'll go ahead and clear the president of obstruction with no evidentiary basis, I don't think that really matters much at the end of the day. I think it matters because it poisons the well of public opinion, and now everybody is hearing the president say he's been completely exonerated, which he hasn't. But I do think at the end of the day, it's not the statement of Bill Barr that will control. It's the evidence that Bob Mueller has found that will control. Once we see it, once Congress sees it, that's when we'll be able to make an informed opinion about whether this president colluded with Russia. We know there's not enough evidence to charge, according to Bob Mueller, a conspiracy with Russia. But did he collude? Different question. And did he commit obstruction of justice?
Right, and just to back what you're saying, I mean, here's Judge Napolitano, who's he wouldn't be on this network. This guy's on Fox, and here's what he had to say in the same regard on Thursday.
I think that Congressman Schiff is correct. In that report will be evidence of the existence of a conspiracy. Not enough evidence to prove the existence beyond a reasonable doubt. In that report will be evidence of obstruction of justice, interfering with an FBI investigation for a personal gain, but not enough evidence to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt.
I mean, Charlie Pierce, I don't think that it is in question that Bob Barr is not the deciding authority here. As Glenn just said, as you just heard Judge Napolitano said, the evidence in the Mueller report eventually will come out. People will get to read what it is. But the public opinion sort of well's already been poisoned. But on the Republican side, you have people like Kevin McCarthy, who used to joke, I think Putin pays Trump, right? That he thinks he's compromised, now all lining up on the side of singing the no collusion songbook. As a political matter, they've already written this narrative, and this is now what Republicans are going to try to use against Democrats.
Yeah, it's funny, Joy, because you made the same mistake a lot of us have been making, which is to say Bob Barr, not Bill Barr. Bill Barr was the congressman. Yeah, Bob Barr was the congressman who pursued the Bill Clinton impeachment. Even before we ever heard of Monica Lewinsky. And I don't think there were any Republicans who were going around saying a president couldn't obstruct justice in those days. At least I don't remember any. Yeah, I think that what happened was, and this goes back to, as I said, those thrilling days of yesteryear, the Republican Party made a commitment in the late 1970s that Watergate was never going to happen again. And they formed a template to handle scandals. And they first put it into place during Iran-Contra, where you stonewall the investigation, you string it out till you can make a charge that it's wasting taxpayers' money, and then ultimately you have somebody in authority have you issue pardons or close the investigation down. And alas, a lot of the media in the 1980s went along with that kind of strategy, and now it's set in stone. And now you're seeing it being activated again in this particular instance.
Yeah, it's interesting because you did have Devin Nunes attempt to do a similar thing. You had the Senate Intelligence Committee issue a report that was similar, but the Bill Barr one seems to be the one that's going to carry forward into 2020. I think there's a term called gaslighting. That's something like that. Glenn Kirshner, Charlie Pierce, thank you very much. Really appreciate you guys' time today. Thank you. And more on this conversation after the break.
That Mueller report should have already been produced to the Congress without his commentary. But clearly, Bill Barr views his role in the unitary executive theory as being the hand of the president's Roy Cohn, there to do the president's bidding and his will. He was a brilliant hire for the White House, but the long-term consequence of this is that in the future, any president under investigation, if he doesn't like what the Attorney General is doing, will fire him and find another that's more suitable to his liking.
It's been quite the week for House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, who is standing firm on the April 2nd deadline for the full, non-redacted Mueller report to be released, as Republicans stage calls for his resignation. Joining me now is Jill Wine-Banks, former Assistant Watergate Special Prosecutor, Paul Butler, MSNBC legal analyst, and Natasha Bertrand of The Atlantic. And Jill, you know, I recall just from reading in the history books that Richard Nixon had to go through a few people before he could find somebody willing to fire Archibald Cox. You know, finding his Roy Cohn turned out to be harder than Donald Trump finding somebody. And the thing that's interesting about the record is that Donald Trump has projected, really for 3 years, or really for 2 years since he's been in the White House, that he really was angry at his first attorney general for recusing himself. And there are numerous stories, headline stories, Washington Post, New York Times, high-level stories stating that he wanted Mueller to be fired, the Mueller probe to be ended, and for his attorney general to protect him. So the record from Trump seems to be that he wanted what Bill Barr has done. That's not, you know, to accuse Bill Barr of covering up the results of the Mueller investigation. We don't know what's in the Mueller report. But it does seem that his public statements have been sufficiently exculpatory that they're very, very helpful to the president.
They are very helpful. And the real problem with this is time is an enemy of the truth in this case, because it will set in the public's mind, particularly in the minds of those who support Donald Trump, that what Barr said is the answer. And it may or may not be. We don't know until we see it. We only know that partial sentences from the Mueller report were included, which always suggests that something important has been left out, or you'd use the full sentence. And until we see why Mueller did what he did, why did he leave the decision? Was it because there wasn't enough evidence, or there was countervailing evidence, or was it because he felt that it should go to Congress for a political judgment on what the evidence meant? Was it because the counterintelligence information was what was so compelling, rather than the narrow elements of a criminal case? And until we see the full report, we will not know. But we do know, you are right, that the Attorney General has done the job he was hired to do. He has concealed immediately and put out a narrative that is dominating the stage. And First Out has a very lasting impact. It's hard to undo first impressions. And so we need to really keep that in mind, that he has done a huge favor just by delaying the results, even if they do come out. And I think that the Democrats in Congress, Adam Schiff and all of the others, are definitely not going to rest until it is completely public and we all can read it. Everything was made public in every other prior investigation. And so let's see what happens. It did take Nixon firing 2 attorneys general before he got to someone who would fire the special counsel. And we need to go back to the laws that came after that so that the special counsel is more protected than currently exists.
Right, and you know, Paul Butler, I think one of the challenges with what William Barr did is that what's the point of having a special counsel if the Attorney General is just going to decide, right? If the only person that's going to actually be able to see the special counsel's work is the partisan, a political appointee of the president, then no president could ever be held accountable via a special counsel, because essentially his Roy Cohn, as you heard Adam Schiff refer to William Barr, could just end the probe whenever he wants, and or, you know, when it ends, draw whatever principal conclusions he wants. He says here in the Barr report below, I summarize the principal conclusions set out in the special counsel's report, meaning that he's telling you what the important things are that you need to know. And then the only quotes in here, the only things in quotes are a truncated sentence that says the investigation, looks like it was a lowercase t, but now it's an uppercase T, did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. Well, as far as he's concerned, case closed.
Yeah, so when we get the full Mueller report, we'll hopefully understand why Mueller punted on the question of obstruction. So he says that he could not exonerate the president on obstruction, which means that he has evidence that the president committed obstruction. Now, he may have mitigating evidence as well, but it cannot be that it was just so hard to make the decision about prosecution that he threw up his hands and said, even though I've got 20 of the best prosecutors and FBI investigators in the country, it's too tough for us, so why don't you decide, Mr. Attorney General? Probably he intended for that evidence to go to Congress, so the Congress could decide whether it met the standard of high crimes and misdemeanors for impeachment. But again, as we keep saying, the Attorney General then did the job that he was hired to do. He had called the obstruction investigation before he was Attorney General fatally misconceived. And when that came up in his confirmation hearings, he backtracked a little, saying, well, I didn't have all the facts. I don't have all the facts about the Russian investigation. Joy, now we know he didn't need the facts. All he needed was the opportunity to do the president's bidding. The president famously made that mistake about hiring Sessions. He didn't make that mistake when he hired Bill Barr.
Right, and you know, Tasha Bertrand, he's also a very fast reader. He apparently went through, 22 months of investigation, 400 some odd pages, not including the notes, which could make it quite a bit longer, and was able to fast conclude in 4 pages. Nothing to see here. The president's done nothing wrong. Is there any reporting on why, having come to such a firm and fast conclusion, suddenly he's backtracking and claiming that what he called a summary, it says summary here, summary of the principal conclusions, isn't even a summary? Why the backtracking if he's so confident in his very, very fast read of whatever's in the Mueller report?
Well, it's my understanding that the Justice Department did not expect, I think, the level of blowback that it got by releasing this 4-page memo, and I think that's also why it took about 5 days for us to even learn how many pages the Mueller report actually was. But I think that we have to go back to Barr kind of stepping into this process in a way that might prevent Congress from making its own decisions about the president's behavior. The special counsel regulations are kind of fatally flawed because they were an overcorrection from the Starr era. And no matter what people say about the appropriateness of Barr kind of stepping into this process and determining, for Mueller essentially whether or not the president was guilty of obstruction, that is what the regulations say. The regulations say that Mueller really has to provide this report to the Attorney General, unlike the independent counsel, Ken Starr, who had to provide all of his findings directly to Congress. So I think what we may see is perhaps a rewriting of the regulations here to find some kind of middle ground between going directly to the AG and going directly to Congress with the findings, because clearly this is not working, right? So you can't indict a sitting president. That's DOJ policy. Obviously it's not binding. But Mueller was never going to do that. And because you can't indict the sitting president, because you can't charge him with this, then of course the only recourse is to provide that evidence to Congress. But the special counsel regulations kind of prevent that. They make it so that the Attorney General is that blockade between the special counsel and Congress. So I think that's something that we have to remember as well. But also, this was a significant walk back, I think, from Barr. And it just shows that I think from people I speak to, the way they perceived it was that this was a rushed letter, that Barr got the memo, got the full report, and he rushed out in order to give the president that cover. And by doing so, he gave the president and his legal team the head start. What is significant, though, is that it does not seem, or he has no plans, according to the letter that he sent to Congress yesterday, like he's going to take the report to the White House and give them the benefit of scrubbing it for executive privilege material, right? So Barr said that the president has said publicly that he would defer to the Attorney General in that case. And so that, I think, should put people at ease, knowing that the White House, for now, is not going to be able to see that report and redact the information that it wants to be redacted.
But how do we know that? I mean, we're relying on William Barr's word for that?
He says that he has no plans to do that, and I think that's a very careful choice of words. And honestly, it would be quite surprising if the White House didn't try. But, there's also the point that the White House may have already waived that executive privilege by giving information and witnesses over to the special counsel in the first place. So it may be futile to even try.
Very quickly, Jill Wine-Banks, have we learned here, because, with the Clinton impeachment, the challenge was that if you had a majority of the other party determined to take down a president, you could simply use the independent counsel statute to go after them, and you could start with Whitewater and end with a sexual affair, and you get what you got there. But then on the other hand, in this version, you wind up doing an entire investigation, putting in all that work with really the finest prosecutors the country has to offer, right? All coming together, and they hand it to the president's man. So, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a proper constitutional means of holding a president accountable that doesn't either allow a true witch hunt or prevent a president from being held accountable.
Well, I agree completely with what Natasha just said. It's what I was saying before, is that we need to re-look at the rules under which this independent counsel is operating. They aren't working. It was well-intentioned, I'm sure, but it clearly has shown the defect in them. There have been 3 different ways of operating. The way that Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox was appointed, the way that the Whitewater case proceeded, which obviously had a huge defect in the report that they made, and then this one. And we need to really rethink it and go back to something better.
Yeah, and you know the difference is, and I would not have much time, but I know what Paul Butler wants to say. The difference was Congress. Congress was different. During the Nixon era, you actually had Republicans that were willing to live with whatever the result of the special counsel investigation was, and to look at it in a not in a partisan way, but just in looking at it, an act. That's not the way we have it now. Jill Wine-Banks, Paul Butler, Natasha Bertrand, thank you guys very much. Coming up, Donald Trump's quest to have his new attorney general do his next thing, which is erase Obamacare. That should be great. That's next. Even though the Mueller report has yet to be released, Donald Trump and his party have been quick to claim total exoneration, which isn't true, but it is politically strategic. What's not so strategic? Trump's default to what his biographers have described as a vindictive streak, one that he hasn't seemed to be able to get past as president. At his first rally since Robert Mueller entered his investigation, Donald Trump issued dire-sounding warnings against anyone behind the probe and basically anyone who has stood against him.
I always say, they say the elite. They're the elite. I'm not. Well, I have a better education than them. I'm smarter than them. I went to the best schools, they didn't. Much more beautiful house, much more beautiful apartment, much more beautiful everything. And I'm president and they're not, right?
Coming up, Donald Trump has a new job for his attorney general, and it's a quite serious one. William Barr and his new job, taking away your health care.
The administration is making very clear that you think the Affordable Care Act is invalid and should be struck down. What is your message to Americans?
Let me just tell you exactly what my message is. The Republican Party will soon be known as the party of health care. You watch.
Remember repeal and replace? The Republican obsession with getting rid of Obamacare, their name for the Affordable Care Act, and ridding 20 million Americans of that pesky health care they seem to like so much. Remember the 50-plus votes Republicans took in Congress trying to get rid of it? Remember how their attacks on health care wrecked Republicans' chances in the last midterm election? Well, they've decided to give that ending Obamacare thing one more go. And now that he's apparently found his Roy Cohn and Attorney General William Barr, Donald Trump has ordered his Justice Department to reverse all historical precedent and refuse to defend the duly passed law against a suit by Republican attorneys general that claims the entire law, the entire Affordable Care Act, is unconstitutional. Join me now, Ovik Roy, opinion editor at Forbes magazine. Ovik, great to talk to you.
Hey, Joy, how are you?
I'm wonderful. This idea of Donald Trump, now through his Attorney General William Barr, that they will junk all precedent and refuse to defend a duly passed law signed by the previous president, passed by Congress, just to try to get rid of it, just because Donald Trump doesn't like it. I don't understand that as a political matter, and I don't understand it as a policy matter. Can you explain why that would be a good idea? 20 million people would lose their health care if this thing were to go through and be affirmed by the Republican majority Supreme Court. Why would that be a good idea?
Well, I think the biggest issue, Joy, is actually the constitutional issue, which is that Obamacare is a 1,000-page law with a lot of different provisions in it that have nothing to do with the individual mandate. It's the individual mandate that's at issue in this particular litigation. And the argument of the lower courts, the attorneys generals who are suing, and now the Trump administration is that the entire law should be overturned as unconstitutional if one believes that the individual mandate is unconstitutional. Now, that's not the position of pretty much any legal expert I know. It wasn't the position of the Trump administration until a couple days ago. And so, to me, that's the thing I'm most concerned about, is the idea that we should be overturning large laws for pretty flimsy reasons. Let the Congress repeal the law if it really wants to. Don't ask the Supreme Court to do your dirty work for you.
And I think that's a very good point, because the Congress, this current Congress, the Republican Congress, has already gutted and undermined the individual mandate by making it so that that people don't actually have to suffer the penalties. So if Congress didn't overturn the entire law and they were willing to just go after that one piece of it, it does seem a strange legal argument for people like Josh Hawley, who was elected over Senator Claire McCaskill in Missouri on the basis of this very thing. He was part of this lawsuit. So these guys are really determined to get rid of this law by any means necessary. So since you and I agree as a legal matter that it's a strange thing to do to try to overturn laws because you don't like one piece of it, from a policy standpoint, Donald Trump is now claiming Republicans will be the party of health care if this goes through. That's the opposite. Republicans were against every form of universal health care going back to FDR. The American people like having health care. As a policy matter, how does it make sense to try to go after this law?
Well, as has been widely reported, Joy, and I think as you know, and you probably talked about it on your show, there was a lot of disagreement. There is a lot of disagreement among Republicans as to this particular decision by the Trump administration to support overturning the entire law through the courts. There are a lot of Republicans who support universal coverage, who've said on the record they want every American to have health insurance. I'm certainly a person who's been advocating for that for 10 years, for my entire career in this line of work. So there are people who want that, but there are a lot of people who disagree. And so if the Republican Party is to be the party of health care like the president wants, there's going to have to be a real agreement about that goal, the goal that every American should have that basic financial security of knowing they're never going to go bankrupt due to health care bills.
The Republican Party is the only agreement that we've seen among Republicans in Congress is that they want to overturn the Affordable Care Act. They also wanted to get rid of Medicare. I mean, Ronald Reagan argued it was going to be the end of the Republic if they passed Medicare and Medicaid. Republicans are foursquare in the main against the idea of universal coverage. You may be for it, but you're in the minority in your party. Republicans do not believe that these things should happen, these creations of insurance marketplaces, allowing people to have Medicaid. There are governors who are elected right now on the promise to not allow Medicaid to be expanded in their states, and they are Republicans.
That's true, but there are also Republicans who are fighting for universal coverage. There's a congressman in the House named Bruce Westerman from Arkansas who's introduced a bill called the Fair Care Act of 2019 that actually puts more money into ensuring that every American who has a pre-existing condition can get affordable coverage. It reforms the high cost of hospital care. It takes on the high cost of prescription drugs. It does the things that would actually not only make health care affordable for those who are uninsured, but for people who have coverage today but are struggling to afford the premiums they're already paying.
That's
so there
one
are
guy
people
at
working on this.
435 people. That's one person.
You got to start somewhere, Joy.
Can you name two?
You got to start somewhere.
Right.
Oh, I mean, sure, absolutely. Yeah, so there's a guy named Jim Banks who's a congressman from Indiana.
I mean, the reality is,
how much time do you have? I could name a lot of people.
Well, but you wouldn't be able to counter the fact that Republicans have voted more than 50 times to attempt to repeal root and branch the Affordable Care Act. They just keep doing it. Do you think that it's smart right now for this to be the next fight of your party? For the next fight to be to find a way to come up with some sort of alternative to the Affordable Care Act that will get all of the more than, whatever, 200 some odd members or almost 200 members of the party in the House, let alone Mitch McConnell, put something on the floor? Is that smart politically?
What Republicans should do, and it's not just about smart politics, it's about morality. What Republicans should do is come up with a plan that ensures that every American can afford health insurance. Anything
you're assuming
that
that you
takes
think
health
they
insurance
should
away
repeal
from
the
people
Affordable
is
Care
not
Act.
a good idea. What's
yeah,
that?
It is. Well, we agree on that.
You know, the Affordable Care Act's not the only way to cover the uninsured, Joy.
But it's the law of the land. It's the law of the land.
Medicare for All would also repeal and replace Obamacare with single-payer health insurance. That's something a lot of people on the left support. So there are alternatives to the Affordable Care Act as a method for covering the uninsured. Some people like AOC and Bernie Sanders have one approach to repealing Obamacare, and people like me have another.
I don't think they're trying to repeal Obamacare, but we'll have another conversation about Medicare for all. At least we agree on the legal matter and on it being a terrible idea. I think that's wonderful bipartisan agreement. Ovik Roy, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you. And coming up, Trump's new plan to make things even worse for asylum seekers. That's next.
Two weeks ago, I briefed the media and testified in Congress that our immigration system was at the breaking point. That breaking point has arrived this week at our border. CBP is facing an unprecedented humanitarian and border security crisis all along our southwest border.
The number of migrants crossing the southern border reached near record highs this month, with border officials saying that they are on track to apprehend up to 100,000 migrants in the month of March alone, 40,000 of them children. Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen is now requesting new authority from Congress to address what she calls the root causes of the emergency by allowing her to deport unaccompanied children faster and to keep families in detention until their asylum cases are decided. Joining me now, former Secretary of Homeland Security under President Obama, Jeh Johnson, and CEO and President of Voto Latino, Maria-Teresa Kumar. Thank you guys for being here. And Secretary Johnson, this idea of Kirstjen Nielsen responding to this, let's put up the border apprehensions are definitely up. If you look at the increase, you can see that red line at the top. At the top is 2019, then that's that dramatic increase. What do you make of the current Homeland Security Secretary's idea that the way to deal with that is to just deport more kids?
Well, first, Joy, thanks for having me on. The numbers you're showing, I lived them for 3 years, month by month, day by day. And we had a crisis in 2014. It was nowhere near the numbers that you're seeing now. And there are ways to respond to this. One thing I would not do, which the Secretary's letter to Congress right now proposes, is amending a law called the TVPRA in a way to make it easier and faster to send unaccompanied kids back to Central America. We might be at the doorstep of another separating families type of crisis, Joy. The idea of sending a 7-year-old back to Central America without due process is something that most Americans should have a serious objection to. There are other ways to deal with this situation right now. As Kevin McAleenan, the commissioner of CBP, pointed out on Tuesday, there were 4,000 apprehensions. One day alone, 4,000. We're on pace this month for 100,000 apprehensions. The highest we saw on my watch was May 2014, 65,000. So this is a crisis. It's very definitely a crisis. There are ways to deal with this. There are answers. There are no easy answers. The one thing that we should not do as Americans is simply send a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, an unaccompanied child back to Central America without due process.
Yeah, and you know, Maria-Teresa, the cruelty of the policies of the Trump administration were meant to be a deterrent, right? The more sort of draconian they are, the more that would theoretically deter people. It's the opposite. More people are coming, which suggests that the crises that we're seeing in places like Venezuela and Honduras and Guatemala are so intense that people are still coming, despite what they know could happen if they get into the hands of ICE and the CBP. And yet, the fact is that just seems sort of on its face true. Here is how the President of the United States is reacting to the idea that more people are coming and seeking asylum in the United States.
You have people coming up, you know, they're all met by the lawyers and they come out, they're all met by the lawyers, and they say the following phrase: I am very afraid for my life. I am afraid for my life. Okay. And then I look at the guy. He looks like he just got out of the ring. He's the heavyweight champion of the world. He's afraid for it. It's a big, fat con job, folks. It's a big, fat con job.
I mean, I think we have to sort of force ourselves to not be surprised anymore. But when you have the President of the United States stand before what looks like an all-white audience and mock people, literally mock them for seeking asylum, I don't even know what to make of that. What do you make of it?
Well, a couple of things. One is that we have to remind the American people that we created the asylum laws. We actually said that, and they were basically implemented by the UN, basically saying that if someone comes into our border, by law, they're allowed to get due process. This president basically wants to throw due process out the door. And for every single American, that should be a concern, because first you start with the most vulnerable, but then they'll end up with U.S. citizens. But let's be clear, one of the reasons that this issue has been exacerbated is because when the Obama administration, and the Secretary knows this, when the Obama administration faced a lot of the same issues with unaccompanied minors, they created programs in those home countries in Central America specifically, where unaccompanied minors can present themselves at local embassies and then be processed from there so that they wouldn't have to make this treacherous journey. One of the first things that this Trump administration did was zero that budget line item out. The same thing when it comes for this idea of trying to go across the border. The president decided that and Secretary Nielsen decided that they were going to close ports of entries, forcing people to go through more dangerous deserts and through rivers and then present themselves. Yes, they cross illegally, but then present present themselves to Border Patrol agents saying, I want asylum. They did the same thing with metering. They decided that they're going to make sure that folks that were trying to present themselves, again, completely legally across the border, they made them wait not 1 or 2 days, but sometimes weeks. And so all of a sudden we have an exacerbation at the border, more than, and yes, we're seeing more flows, but it was, some of it was its own doing by this Trump administration. And the question we have to ask ourselves as Americans is that if we want to make sure that we want to mitigate what's happening at the border, that we're protecting young children, what a better way to actually spend that $21 billion on a border wall than perhaps actually investing it in those home countries where that money can go an incredible long way and work on basically securing those different countries in a way that they won't have to make those treacherous journeys.
Right, and to that point, Secretary Johnson, in addition to that, I mean, right now what the Trump administration is doing, what Donald Trump through his Twitter is doing, is starting to just close the border and essentially blaming Mexico for what they are also receiving is an inundation of migrants crossing through Mexico to try to get to, as Maria Teresa pointed out, present themselves at legal ports of entry, changing the program that was in place when you were Secretary of Homeland Security. And you have the President of Mexico, Andres Manuel López Obrador, saying, hello, the problem is the United States. The problem is this is a problem of the United States. It's a problem of the Central American countries. It's not up to Mexico. It's not up to Mexicans. Trump overlooks how Mexico has increased its immigration enforcement efforts, essentially saying this is not Mexico's fault. But that's what Trump is doing, threatening to close the border and blaming Mexico.
So, Joy, I'm going to repeat what I said just a few minutes ago on Fox. You cannot close a border. You cannot close a 1,900-mile border, and you don't need to be Secretary of Homeland Security to know. This is kind of common sense. The president might have the legal authority to close ports of entry, bridges and so forth, but all you're doing is simply driving illegal migration away from the place that they've been encouraging migrants to go, and simply encouraging them to cross the land borders. We know less then about people who are entering our country, and it's really it would have an adverse effect on legal migration and legal commerce. Mexico is one of our biggest trading partners, and there's an awful lot of commerce that occurs on a daily basis on our southern border, on the U.S. side, on the Mexican side, and so simply closing ports of entry would do a lot to actually hurt lawful immigration and lawful commerce.
Thank you very much. That's former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson. Thank you so much for your time. Maria Teresa will be back in our next hour. Thank you, guys. More AM after the break.
And in a surprise, potentially more important, we learned today that a Trump campaign volunteer advisor, George Papadopoulos, has admitted that he was in touch with Russians during the campaign, who said they had Kremlin contacts and could offer, quote, dirt on Hillary Clinton, including thousands of emails.
Welcome back to AM Joy. Back in October of 2017, news of the then little-known George Papadopoulos' guilty plea came as a surprise for everyone covering the Russia investigation. Papadopoulos was the first to plead guilty in Mueller's probe, the first Trump campaign advisor to be sentenced, and his case was the first to detail a member of the Trump campaign having knowledge of Russian efforts to interfere in the election while it was ongoing. In fact, it was Papadopoulos' actions that triggered the Russia investigation in the first place, when he bragged to an Australian diplomat that Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton. An investigation that has so far led to 34 people being charged, 7 guilty pleas, 1 conviction by trial, 4 people being jailed or incarcerated, and 5 sentencings. And joining me now is former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos. He's also the author of Deep State Target: How I Got Caught in the Crosshairs of the Plot to Bring Down President Trump. Thank you so much for being
Thanks
here.
For having
Great to
me.
meet you.
You
So
too.
I have read your book. It's very interesting. You walk back a lot of what I just said in the intro, a lot of what you pleaded guilty to, and were sentenced to, 14 days in jail? In prison?
11 nights.
11 nights in prison for. I think so. You served less time than when you were actually sentenced to her. So let's just go through it.
Sure.
You were, Donald Trump said, a coffee boy, which you've disputed, which your now wife has disputed.
Michael Caputo said that, and Michael Caputo is a guy who was fired within a month of joining the campaign, and I had no overlap with him.
Okay.
So the president never said that.
Had never said that. So you were essentially a foreign policy advisor. You were one of the advisors to the president. Donald Trump, He did say he didn't know you, but you're in the room with him. There are pictures of you in the room. How did you get to be a foreign policy advisor with the Trump campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was working at a think tank in D.C. for 5 years, and then I went off to Europe where I was working as an energy advisor to various U.S. companies operating in the Middle East.
Okay.
I joined the Ben Carson campaign after that, so I was already working on a presidential campaign before I joined another one, and then I ended up joining Trump's presidential campaign in March of 2016.
And how many face-to-face contacts did you have with the president himself to advise him personally?
I had one face-to-face meeting with him, and I was dealing primarily with the senior level campaign members.
With Jeff Sessions and others.
Jeff Sessions, Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn. I was actually working up until the transition, advising Steve Bannon and Michael Flynn, so that's why I had to write this book, because there was so much misunderstanding of exactly what I was doing, who I am, that this book, I think, clarifies a lot of that.
So a lot of what happened with you centers around a Maltese professor named Joseph Mifsud.
Yeah.
Who is he? How did you meet him?
Yeah, that's a very important question. So the old narrative was that this was some sort of Russian intermediary that I randomly met, and we were discussing hacked emails. The reality is, and as you see in my book, Deep State Target, I met this individual through an FBI intermediary in London at a Western intelligence spy school in Rome that David Ignatius of the Washington Post has written about himself. And then I'm meeting with him. He's introducing me to fake people like the niece of Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin has no siblings. So obviously, whatever this person was doing, it was some sort of entrapment effort to make it look like I was dealing with Russians when I really wasn't. And that's actually what Deep State Target's all about.
But you were pursuing these conversations.
Look, I've been very open that I wanted Donald Trump to meet Vladimir Putin. I told Donald Trump to his face at that round table, I'm going to do this for you. I was unsuccessful in doing it.
Why did you think he needed to meet Vladimir Putin?
Politics is all about optics, right? So as a foreign policy advisor, my job was to do two things. And that's actually why I met him only one time, because he was out campaigning, meeting people and voters, not dealing with foreign policy issues around the world.
But if you were an advisor at the level of trying to arrange a meeting between a presidential candidate and the president of Russia, that's a pretty high-level thing to be doing. If you've only met with the candidate once, why would you be the person that's creating that meeting?
Well, I ended up introducing Donald Trump to the Egyptian president in September, and I did that through Steve Bannon. I necessarily didn't have to be talking to Donald Trump himself to do that, because...
So you considered yourself to be a pretty high-level person in the campaign?
I mean, I don't consider myself anything. Everything is relative. I just know what I did. So whatever people think that is, it could have been of a coffee boy duty, or it could have been of a higher up.
And before you joined the Ben Carson campaign and the Trump campaign, what were your qualifications essentially to be a senior foreign policy guy? What were did you have personal contacts with foreign heads of state?
Yeah, I did, and that's
with who?
I had personal contacts with, let's say, the Prime Minister of Greece, the President of Cyprus. How
did you obtain those contacts?
Working in this think tank industry in Washington, D.C. for years, and then going off to Europe as an energy consultant myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you're a pretty young guy. You were like in your late 20s, early 30s. How old were you?
Yeah, I guess I was very precocious in my, my field.
So you wrote in your book, you wrote, and I underlined one passage from it. You said almost everyone that you met, you describe it as almost a Jason Bourne novel. Almost everyone that you met had ties to intelligence outfits. Essentially, you allege in this book that almost everyone you spoke to was a part of what you describe as pretty wide-ranging conspiracy among U.S. intelligence agencies, foreign intelligence agencies, essentially the government of Australia or high-level Australian diplomats, all to go through you, individually you, to try to do what to you?
Look, I was one of 4 guys that, actually not guys, because Loretta Lynch and Sally Yates was invited. So about 3 or 4 months ago, I was invited to testify in front of the House Oversight Committee. There were only 4 witnesses invited to discuss FISA abuse, and those people were Papadopoulos, Lynch, Yates, and Comey. And people were wondering, why was George Papadopoulos one of those people? And it's exactly because, like you stated, these high-level operatives did try and go through me to effectively undermine the campaign, and consequently...
Why would they do that?
Because they had their own agenda. I mean, I make it clear. I mean, these people who were running at me were clearly biased against candidate Trump.
But there were other people in the campaign, people like Carter Page, who a lot of people wonder how compromised he might have been, either whether was he talking with the FBI, who was he talking with.
I had my own suspicions about him, too, and I mentioned them, too, yeah.
There were Steve Bannon, you had Jeff Sessions, you had a lot of people there. But you're alleging that all of these sort of agencies, big, pretty high-level government agencies, were all targeting you. Why would they target you?
Well, they did, and there's evidence that proves that. I mean, people like Stephen Halper, who's been an outed CIA asset, who was paying me money.
But they're picking you out of all these people.
That's exactly what they were doing.
So let me ask you this. Did Joseph Mifsud actually say to you, that the Russian government had dirt on Hillary Clinton?
What he told me at the Andes Hotel in London, I think at late April, was that the Russians, I've been told, have thousands of Hillary Clinton's emails. And it's as if he dropped his bomb on me and walked away and was trying to see what I would end up doing with that information. Now, and then that's where things became very bizarre. My life, as I explained in my book, after that comment, my life became very strange. I had intelligence officials from the Israeli embassy reaching out, the Australian embassy, the U.S. embassy. I'm giving some off-the-cuff remarks to the Times of London, where there's this new target on me. And then all of that sequence of events leads me to meet none other than Alexander Downer, who I myself, by the way, I just want to make it clear to the viewers, I guess we both thought we were very bizarre at this meeting because I ended up reporting him to the FBI and Bob Mueller myself.
And just so the audience knows, Alexander Downer was the Australian High Commissioner.
Yes.
And the thing that reportedly touches off the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign is you meeting with Mr. Downer at a bar. You say you weren't drinking. You remember you had a gin and tonic.
Yeah.
Okay. And you telling him what Joseph Mifsud told you, that the Russian government has dirt on Hillary Clinton. You now say you never told him that.
I never told him, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So if I told him that, the last thing people like Mark Meadows or Devin Nunes in Congress would be imploring the president to do is declassify my FISA file, which now the president in a couple days has stated he will. And secondly, the Australian government for the last 5 months has been asking President Trump, please do not declassify FISA material. If I said that, the last thing President Trump's allies would be asking the president to do is declassify material that suggests I was talking to an Australian diplomat about a conspiracy to undermine U.S. democracy.
Well, here's the challenge that I have with that. Just in reading your book, to be honest with you, and I do appreciate you coming here.
Sure.
You're saying that Joseph Mifsud did tell you.
He did.
That that the Russian government had some sort of dirt on Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
This commissioner, Alexander Downer, told intelligence services that you told him that same thing. If you didn't tell him that, where would he get it from? I mean, he couldn't have just made up and then coincidentally got right that Joseph Mifsud told you that.
Well, not necessarily, because as you now my congressional.
I mean, how would he just come up with that?
Well, that's a great question, and as you'll see in my congressional testimony that's been released a couple days ago, all 236 pages, Alexander Downer was not described to me, and as far as I'm concerned, he was not described as a friendly diplomat passing along information. He seemed to be, and I think Congress knows that he was some sort of guy sent to spy on me, to sabotage me, and to try and come up with some sort of angle that he could then potentially transmit.
Why would the High Commissioner of Australia target you? I mean, I'm not trying to say that you weren't an important person, but Donald Trump said he doesn't even know you. But you're saying that of all the people in the campaign, all of these foreign government officials are targeting you. Somehow, the High Commissioner of Australia just guesses that you know that Joseph Mifsud told you that the Russian government has dirt on Hillary Clinton. That's a hell of a guess.
But let's look at who the messenger is, right? Joseph Mifsud. That's the key to this entire conspiracy.
Do you think Joseph Mifsud told the High Commissioner that?
I have absolutely no idea, but it's certainly plausible. If whoever will read my congressional testimony will probably see that Congress has their own suspicions about what went really down with Alexander Downer and Joseph Mifsud, and obviously now with Australia trying to intervene in the FISA declassification process. Certainly that there's much more to the story than people have reported.
You admit that there may be tapes that perhaps Alexander Downer taped your conversation with him.
Yeah.
Would it surprise you if on that tape you're telling him that Joseph Mifsud told you that the Russian government, I mean, he would presumably would have tapes of it, yeah?
Yeah, so that's why I want that tape to be released, because I know I didn't say that. And I told Congress myself that I think that this guy was taping me. I even told the FBI and Mueller himself that I think he was taping me. So you know what? I'm all for transparency. I'm all for the full Mueller report to come out. Let's lay out all the cards and let's see who did something wrong, who did something right.
So the reporting now is that you're thinking of withdrawing your guilty plea for lying to the FBI about these conversations. Yeah. And asking for a pardon.
Yeah.
When you were sentenced to initially 14 days, now you said you only served 11 days in prison, you said yourself, you said you wanted to distance yourself as much as possible and Trump and the campaign from what is probably an illegal action or dangerous information. You told the judge you were blinded by personal ambition and the thrill of being part of Mr. Trump's electoral victory. Just before the interview, the FBI interview, you said you attended an inauguration event, and just after you promoted your campaign work as a reason you should be hired by the Energy Department. You said, I was surrounded by important people. I was young and ambitious and excited. You admitted to lying. You admitted that you passed along to this Australian diplomat information saying that there was dirt that the Russians had on Hillary Clinton. you admitted it to the judge.
No,
Why would you withdraw that?
Okay, so I never admitted to the judge anything about Alexander Downer, just to be clear.
Okay.
Secondly, first of all, when I pled guilty, it was much earlier than after I found out tremendous new information about my entire saga, this entire story. So basically, I went into a guilty plea blind without having exculpatory evidence presented to me, which basically is a crime.
But the thing is that you either lied to the FBI or you didn't. If you pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI, then you admitted that you did it. So whether or not you think that lots of high-level people from all over the world were trying to target you, you either lied to the FBI or didn't. You pleaded guilty to doing that.
Well, look, I have a great legal team that believes that there was a base. I'm not a lawyer, okay, so I don't want to get into legalities because I'm not a lawyer, but then that's why maybe my lawyers could answer these questions a little better than I can. They believe there's a basis for, and actually, even before I went to prison, as I don't know if you remember, but we were discussing withdrawing that guilty plea, because even then they believe that there was a basis for withdrawing it, and now certainly they believe there's a basis for a pardon, and they've applied for one. As I've stated many times, if I'm offered one, I would accept it, but I personally have not reached out to the president and asked for one.
There's been an application for a pardon.
Yeah,
you've applied for it.
Look, my lawyers are looking out for my best interests, my best legal interests, and they think that given all the circumstances, all the new evidence that's come out about my case, that certainly one should be granted.
Very quickly, your defense attorney at the time that you pleaded guilty, or the time that you were sentenced, Thomas Breen, essentially said that the blame, at least part of the blame for your lies to the FBI that, you know, were the reason that you were sentenced, really were to be blamed on Donald Trump. This is the quote: "The President of the United States hindered this investigation more than George Papadopoulos ever could. The message for all of us is to check our loyalty, to tell the truth, and help the good guys." That's what your lawyer said about Donald Trump. You expect Donald Trump to give you a pardon after essentially your legal team blamed him?
Look, I don't blame anyone. Okay, I'm a man. I take responsibility for my actions. So, like I said, they're lawyers. They're probably looking out for my legal interests, but I don't impose blame on anyone but myself. I took full responsibility. I did my time. I'm moving on with my life. I'm getting the truth out there, though, because obviously my name has been denigrated for so long, and I'm just letting America understand what really happened, what happened in this country to an American citizen, and whether I end up, you know, getting back into government or whether I end up doing something else with my life, I'm going to let America decide. My
exit question to you: why do you suppose that so many Russian, Kremlin-linked people wanted to have contact with so many people in the Trump campaign, and why so many people in the Trump campaign lied about their contacts with Russia? It's a hell of a coincidence if all of that was happening. Why do you think that was happening?
So what I think is, every 4 years, the biggest event in the world is not the World Cup or the Olympics. It's the presidential election and the campaign leading up to that, right? You're always going to have friends and foes trying to intervene, to undermine that process, to get an inside door view of what policies might or might not come out of certain candidates, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. So I'm certain.
I don't think it's ever happened ever before in any Democratic or Republican campaign.
That foreign governments trying to intervene and interfere.
At this level, I don't think that.
I don't know
at
this level of actually hacking emails, because obviously technology has become much more sophisticated.
And talking to literally almost everyone in the campaign down to your level.
Look, everybody wants a foot in. If Russia's responsible for interfering in our election, I've made it clear I hope that they're punished. And I acknowledge that what the U.S. intelligence community has stated about them. And look, leading up to my work with Donald Trump, I was very hostile to Russia. I mean, that's why this is so bizarre that I ended up becoming the epicenter of a Russia conspiracy. Right. When not only I was very hostile towards Russia in my work, and everything, and even my policies with Donald Trump, but I never met a Russian official in my life. That's why my story is so fascinating, and why I think it's a great read, and thank you so much for having me on, and I hope to see you again soon.
I appreciate you coming, George Papadopoulos. Thank you very much.
Thank
you so much for your time. All right, and coming up, Donald Trump doesn't want you to see Congressman Eric Swalwell on TV. He does not, and that's why he joins me next.
The findings of the special counsel conclusively refute your past and present assertions and have exposed you as having abused your position to knowingly promote false information. As such, we have no faith in your ability to discharge your duties in a manner consistent with your constitutional responsibility and urge your immediate resignation as chairman of the committee.
The right's new favorite boogeyman is now Adam Schiff. House Republicans went after him on Thursday, even demanding that he resign as chairman of the House Intelligence Committee over his comments on the Russia investigation. Then, not 24 hours after Donald Trump's victory lap over the Barr report, his campaign sent a memo to TV producers that looks a lot like an enemies list, warning them about booking 6 Trump critics. A list that includes 4 Democratic lawmakers who the campaign says, quote, made outlandish false claims by noting that public evidence pretty clearly seemed to point toward collusion. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has made more than 9,000 documented false or misleading claims since taking office. Just thought we'd note that. Joining me now is one of the 4 lawmakers on that enemies list, Congressman Eric Swalwell. He's a member of the Judiciary and House Intelligence Committees. Congressman Swalwell, thanks so much for being here.
Of course. Good morning, Joy.
Good morning. So I just spoke to George Papadopoulos, who of course was the first person to plead to be arrested or to be indicted in the Mueller probe. And I want to just get your take. He did mention on his way out of the studio that he's going to be testifying in front of your committee, in front of the House Intelligence Committee soon. And he made a claim that I thought was pretty extraordinary in the book. Essentially, that he didn't tell the Australian High Commissioner that this professor, Joseph Mifsud, had told him that Russia had dirt on Hillary Clinton, but that I guess the High Commissioner just guessed it because it was the High Commissioner who reported it to intelligence services and got the Mueller, got the counterintelligence investigation going. What do you make of that claim that essentially the Australian High Commissioner just, I guess, guessed that Joseph Mifsud had said that?
Yeah, I can't, Joy, with this guy. It doesn't add up. It's never added up. The one thing I will accept he was telling the truth about was when he said, I'm guilty to lying to the FBI. But to your point, how would this High Commissioner know this information? But more importantly, the previewing of the Russian-hacked emails was before anyone in the public knew that Russia was hacking Hillary Clinton's emails. So again, I just don't understand that he's suggesting that our Intelligence Committee knew that Russia had hacked Hillary's emails, didn't tell anyone about it, and then in this backwards way fed this to him. Again, it doesn't add up. And again, by his own words, he thought it would be a good idea for his boss, candidate Trump, to meet with Vladimir Putin. So you know where all of these guys are coming from. They wanted us to be closer to the Russians.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear. And you know, there's a gaslighting sort of aspect to what the Republicans are now saying. They're going after your chairman, Adam Schiff. They're going after you. They're going after all of the Democrats who, over these last 3 years, have been talking about this seemingly relentless campaign to get Donald Trump closer to Vladimir Putin and to the Kremlin, down to talking with Mr. Papadopoulos, who was not a high-level member in the campaign. Everyone was getting, you know, people were coming at them with offers of the Clinton emails or offers to get Trump closer to Russia. Is there some innocent explanation for why this adversarial foreign government would be so intent on getting close to this one candidate?
Not a single innocent explanation. And again, to step back a little bit, this was not the Brits or the Mexicans, traditional allies, reaching out to a campaign. I mean, this was the starting point of this is it was a foreign adversary who just months before the campaign began invaded one of our allies, Ukraine. And so that itself is suspect that they would draw themselves so close to an adversary. But also, Joy, when you read that Barr opinion letter, that criminally clears Donald Trump. It doesn't say that there was no wrongdoing or there's no counterintelligence concern. And so if they're going to throw a parade or, you know, believe that Donald Trump was just nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in that letter, I think they're missing a larger point. So I think the best thing we can do right now is to just see the full contents of that Mueller report to best protect ourselves from this ever happening again.
If William Barr refuses to release it in full and unredacted, will the Democratic leadership subpoena it? Will Adam Schiff subpoena it?
Yes, the president is outnumbered now in that the voters gave us, you know, a balance of power over these abuses of power. They gave us that subpoena power this past November. So we'll subpoena it, but we're also confident that if we have to go to the courts, that because of the judicial precedent that already exists through the Watergate litigation, that's also on our side too. It's just, Joy, you know, frustratingly, we won't see it probably as soon as we need to, or as, you know, much as the public would like to see it, just as we have more awareness to go into the 2020 election.
Congressman, sir, we saw Donald Trump's campaign, his 2020 re-election effort, issue what can only really be described as an enemies list. You were on it. It's a pretty strange thing to tell television producers, and it says, moving forward, this is instructions to us. We ask that you employ basic journalistic standards when booking such guests to appear anywhere in your universe of productions. You should begin by asking the basic question, does this guest warrant further appearances on our programming, given the outrageous and unsupported claims made in the past? I will be not shy about saying that we reached out to each and every one of you guys. We would have put you all on TV today. Everyone has different schedules, and you were very thankfully available to us, because the idea that you have a presidential campaign and the campaign of a sitting president instruct television producers who to book and who not to book. I don't know where that sits with you, sir, in terms of the First Amendment and in terms of the traditions of this country, but I'll just get your thoughts.
Well, I'm not going away, Joy. I love this country too much, and I grew up seeing my parents work hard and believe that having free markets, free speech, and free ideas would give their firstborn son the freedom to dream. And I believe that if we draw ourselves close to Russia, we're going to drift toward a oligarch system where it's a top floor economy that only benefits people who work on the top floors of the building, while everyone else toils away and gets nothing, and all the rights we depend on will just evaporate. I'm not going to let that happen. I'm going to stay loud. I know Chairman Schiff is going to stay loud. And it's also a little bit interesting that the president, who's been accused by the Washington Post, an objective source, of telling over 6,000 lies, is going to tell the media who can and cannot come on TV. The only person who has lied about Russia is Donald Trump. And if he wants to take me up on that, or take the public up on that, he can see me in court. That's a language he understands. He can sue me if he thinks I'm making a false statement. And I promise you, Joy, I will win if he does.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you so much, sir. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you. All right, coming up, thank you. Obamacare is more popular than Donald Trump, like way, way, way more popular than Donald Trump. Way more popular. And that's why he wants to destroy it. That's next. Okay, so earlier in the show, we meant to play a soundbite highlighting Donald Trump's warnings about the Russia probe and anyone who dares to stand against him. Unfortunately, we kind of played Trump talking about how awesome his life is in his apartment. It's all gold. Awesome apartment. Here's the portion of the speech we actually meant to play.
All of the current and former officials who paid for, promoted, and perpetuated the single greatest hoax in the history of politics in our country. They have to be, I'm sorry, they have to be accountable.
Gotta love a little authoritarianism in the morning. Up next, Donald Trump goes after Obamacare.
It's absolutely the case that health care was a big issue in the last election, and I do believe it didn't work well for Republicans. I don't think that's because we've opposed Obamacare. I think it's because many Republicans didn't have a good answer to how you're going to deal with the very real problem of people with pre-existing health problems.
Well, guess what? Republicans still don't have a good answer. And as Donald Trump says, Republicans will become the party of health care. Well, Mitch McConnell says he's not about to be played by the president. Okay, he told Politico, I look forward to seeing what the president is proposing and what he can work out with the speaker. Okay, ouch. Back with me, Maria Teresa Kumar, MSNBC contributor, and Ovik Roy, opinion editor at Forbes magazine. And joining us now, Karine Jean-Pierre, MSNBC contributor and senior advisor for MoveOn.org. I'm going to go to you first, KJP, because MoveOn was one of the organizations that really got out there and fought against the, what was it, 58th or 51st or whatever attempt to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It went all the way through the Senate. Only John McCain and maybe one other Republican opposing it stopped it from happening. What do you make of the fact that Republicans, because of their absolute fidelity to Donald Trump, have been steered right into what seems to be the worst possible political outcome, a fight over health care coming into an election.
Yeah, after they lost an election, right, in 2018 because of health care. That was the number one reason why, one of the number one reasons why Democrats were able to take back the House, because folks wanted them to protect health care. Americans wanted them to protect people with pre-existing conditions. Americans wanted them to lower the cost of health care. And you saw Democrats do that this week on Tuesday, led by the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi. They introduced legislation that do all of those things and also stop the damage that Republicans have been doing, the death by 1,000 cuts towards ACA. But the funny thing, too, about this, Joy, is that Republicans, as we know, it's called Affordable Care Act, but Republicans were the one that they wanted to change it to Obamacare because they wanted Democrats to own it, to own Obamacare, and Obama to own Obamacare. And he said, okay, fine, we own it because we're proud of this. And by doing that, by continuously voting more than 50 times to repeal it and have nothing to replace it once they took control, they made Obamacare popular. And now they have nothing to replace it, and they are not working on anything. McConnell and McCarthy are turning their backs on it, but they are connected to this. There's no daylight between them and Donald Trump. They've taken this ACA to court dozens of times, and now Democrats are like, bring it on. Yeah, okay, you want to talk about health care? Let's do it.
You know, and Ovik, you know, in the last hour, you know, I thought it was very important that you stated that, you know, you object to this idea of trying to use the courts to do what they couldn't do legislatively, and I respect that you said that. But the Republican challenge here is that they're on record, individual Republicans, even as opposing the idea of imposing these mandates to provide pre-existing condition protections. And on a free market basis, a lot of Republicans say, no, if, you know, insurance companies want to charge more if someone has a pre-existing condition, why can't they do it? You have Mike Pence, who sees the politics and may one day want to run for president, saying, no, 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 don't do this. He thinks it would be a terrible idea to throw millions of people suddenly off of insurance. So he's saying it's a bad idea, or at least he's making sure that people know that he thinks that. But Donald Trump is tripling down to the point where the point man that he picked to be the point man is this guy, Rick Scott, the former Florida governor who ran as a Tea Partier on his opposition to the idea of Obamacare, full stop, who is for repealing it, and who, when he was a healthcare executive, his company was fined, I think, the world record for Medicare fraud, Medicaid fraud, and for defrauding TRICARE, the military healthcare program. That's the point man, Ovik. This does not seem wise.
Well, I think there are going to be a lot of people who pipe in on what the Republican plan should be to reform the health care system from here. We mentioned in the last hour, Joy, this bill from Bruce Westerman, the congressman from Arkansas, which is called the Fair Care Act of 2019. The Pelosi bill that was introduced last week, it would spend $10 billion a year to help people with pre-existing conditions get affordable coverage through something called reinsurance. The Westerman bill appropriates $20 billion a year, twice as much money to fund high-risk pools reinsurance to help people who are low income, who have pre-existing conditions
you keep
coverage.
Pushing this Westerman bill. How many co-sponsors does it have? How many co-sponsors does it have?
He just introduced it a couple of weeks ago. But
okay,
this
but
is,
he's
again,
not
how
the
you
point
start.
man, Ovik. The point man is the guy I just showed you, Rick Scott. You have and listen, you have the Senate leader is saying he's not even interested in participating in this. So this Westerman guy who, one congressman, that's great that he's for health care. He's not the one who's running point on this. It is. There's Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. Let me go to, I'm going to come back to you, but let me go to Maria Teresa Kumar. Because the things that Republicans are doing, there's a thing that Ovik is saying, which I think is principled. And Ovik and I have had this conversation about health care for a long time, and I don't doubt his principles. But the things they're doing are the things that actually courts are sort of stopping Republicans from doing. An attempt to impose work requirements on Medicaid. So somebody who might be both poor and ill, trying to force them to go out to work. A different judge struck down this week efforts to make health insurance plans available outside the Affordable Care Act that avoid the requirements of the health care law, saying that it's illegal, meaning that they want to be able to offer people sort of bargain basement gut bucket plans that basically don't cover anything, but they're cheap. So that they're cheap, so you're like, great, I have health care. Then you try to use it, it doesn't cover anything. That's outlawed by the law. I mean, these are the things Republicans are actually trying to implement.
Joy, it's been over 6 years, and the Republicans have not been able to actually provide a proposal. This idea that this congressperson, basically, we can't identify how many co-sponsors it has. Plenty of bills have been introduced that have hundreds of co-sponsors the minute they arrive. So this is basically dead on arrival. But there's no alternative, and the American people understand when they're trying to get hoodwinked. 20 million people right now have health care because of ACA. If the #1 reason before ACA that many Americans were actually declaring bankruptcy was because of their lack of health insurance. That was the #1. There's not an American on both sides of the aisle that recognize that the moment that you take out health care from underneath them, pre-existing conditions from out, they become economically vulnerable. This is completely nonsense on the Republican side. The fact that you have Susan Collins saying, oh my, all of a sudden saying that this might be overreach on the president's proposal, they want to pick and choose when they don't want to be part of the checks and balances system that was designed by our Constitution. This is an example of it, but they're okay when it comes to basically forfeiting their authority when it comes to, let's say, funneling $20 billion to the wall and taking money out of the Pentagon without oversight. This is complete nonsense.
Yeah, and Corinne, let's put that back up again, because I think the stakes of this are so high for, there are people that were all in my Twitter feed the other day when the president announced that he wanted Bill Barr, his attorney general, to now withdraw support for defending the law against what most people think is a very out there lawsuit. Ovik said it too, that it's pretty way out there to say the whole law is unconstitutional. We're talking about 21 million people's health care, 12 million adults who could lose Medicaid coverage, who got the expansion. You're talking about kids, like, my kids are on my health insurance. They get to be on until they're 26 years old. It's something that has saved a lot of young people from being uninsured. Medicare beneficiaries who would face changes, meaning a lot of our seniors really being harmed by having their premiums immediately go up, and 133 million Americans who could lose protections for pre-existing conditions, not to mention the fact that even if you don't have the 7% of so people who buy through the exchanges, who a lot of them don't like it, right? They don't like the exchanges, but that's only like 7%. Just all of us who have insurance through our employer, the free health screenings, the ability to get, health screenings that you don't have to then fork out for. These things affect millions and tens of millions of people. I wonder, what are the Democrats going to do if this, the Supreme Court is 5-4 Republican. What if the law goes away? What are Democrats going to do?
I mean, I want to be really clear about this, because Donald Trump, as we know, is the head of the Republican Party. And what he is saying, that he wants to kick off tens of millions of people off of their health care without a replacement, period. This is what Donald Trump wants to do. And he's using the Department of Justice, which is supposed to be independent, which is led by Barr, who is doing all of his dirty work, clearly, to do this. This is Obamacare, Affordable Care Act is the law of the land. They're not arguing portions of it. Now they're saying they want it to be null and void. They want to repeal it entirely, something that is constitutional. So look, in the past, Joy, we had the U.S. Supreme Court has stepped in twice, led by John Roberts, to say, no, it is constitutional. We are not going to do this to Obamacare, Affordable Care Act. We're not going to, repeal it. We're not going to stop it. It is the law of the land. And this is what we're going to see again. And I can't imagine, John Roberts has stepped in twice, like I said, to not do this. So I'm thinking it's the same thing is going to happen a third time. I just don't see how he gets away with that. But Democrats have to continue to fight. They have to continue to fight. That's the only answer here.
We're really out of time. We're out of time. I just want to give Ovik one more shot to say, is this going to be John Roberts that it's going to come down to?
Well, listen, President Trump, when he campaigned for president in Republican primaries, campaigned on universal coverage. When he was elected,
but he said he wants to get rid of it. No, wait, Ovik, I'm sorry. He said he wants to get rid of it. He just said he's going to terminate it.
Wait a minute.
He's going to terminate it.
He campaigned on universal coverage, so it's important for him. If he wants the party to be the party of health care,
he said he wants to terminate it. That's what you can't look at what people say. You have to look at what they do. It's not what they say; it's what they do. He ordered Bill Barr to withdraw support for the law. Okay, we got to go. Dimitri Kumar, Ovik Roy, Corinne Jean-Pierre. Thank you guys. Sorry, the clock has got me. Coming up, the absolute best response to Barr's report. Sorry.
I'm so proud of the work of Chairman Adam Schiff, in stark contrast to the irresponsible, almost criminal behavior of the previous chair of the committee. So what is the president afraid of? Is he afraid of the truth? That he would go after a member, a chairman of a committee, a respected chairman of a committee in the Congress? I think they're just scaredy cats. They just don't know what to do, so they have to make an attack.
In the past, members of the House Intelligence Committee have been so lauded for their bipartisanship that the New York Times once referred to the committee as a, quote, longtime oasis of country-first comity in a bitterly divided Congress. That all changed when the former chair, now ranking member, Republican Devin Nunes, released a now debunked memo in 2017, which looked suspiciously like an attempt to decide the outcome of the Russia investigation in Donald Trump's favor. Since then, the committee has been bitterly divided along party lines, with the Republican members trying to stifle Democratic investigations of the Trump campaign and administration at all costs. But this week, current chair Adam Schiff fought back.
My colleagues may think it's okay that the Russians offered dirt on a Democratic candidate for president as part of what was described as the Russian government's effort to help the Trump campaign. You might think that's okay. My colleagues might think it's okay that when that was offered to the son of the president, who had a pivotal role in the campaign, that the president's son did not call the FBI. He did not adamantly refuse that foreign help. No, instead, that son said that he would love the help of the Russians. You might think it's okay that he took that meeting. You might think it's okay that Paul Manafort, the campaign chair, someone with great experience in running campaigns, also took that meeting. You might think it's okay that the president's son-in-law also took that meeting. You might think it's okay that they concealed it from the public. You might think it's okay that their only disappointment after that meeting was that the dirt they received on Hillary Clinton wasn't better. You might think that's okay. You might think it's okay that when it was discovered a year later that they lied about that meeting and said it was about adoptions. You might think it's okay that the president is reported to have helped dictate that lie. You might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay that the campaign chairman of a presidential campaign would offer information about that campaign to a Russian oligarch in exchange for money or debt forgiveness. You might think that's okay. I don't. You might think it's okay that that campaign chairman offered polling data, campaign polling data to someone linked to Russian intelligence. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that the president himself called on Russia to hack his opponent's emails if they were listening. You might think it's okay that later that day, in fact, the Russians attempted to hack a server affiliated with that campaign. I don't think that's okay. You might think that it's okay that the president's son-in-law sought to establish a secret back channel of communications with the Russians through a Russian diplomatic facility. I don't think that's okay. You might think it's okay that an associate of the president made direct contact with the GRU through Guccifer II and WikiLeaks and that is considered a hostile intelligence agency. You might think that it's okay a senior campaign official was instructed to reach that associate and find out what that hostile intelligence agency had to say in terms of dirt on his opponent. You might think it's okay that the National Security Advisor designate secretly conferred with a Russian ambassador about undermining U.S. sanctions, and you might think it's okay he lied about it to the FBI. You might say that's all okay. You might say that's just what you need to do to win. But I don't think it's okay. I think it's immoral. I think it's unethical. I think it's unpatriotic. And yes, I think it's corrupt and evidence of collusion. Now, I have always said that the question of whether this amounts to proof of conspiracy was another matter. Whether the special counsel could prove beyond a reasonable doubt the proof of that crime would be up to the special counsel, and I would accept his decision, and I do. He's a good and honorable man, and he is a good prosecutor. But I do not think that conduct, criminal or not, is okay. And the day we do think that's okay is the day we will look back and say that is the day America lost its way. And I will tell you one more thing that is apropos of the hearing today. I don't think it's okay that during a presidential campaign, Mr. Trump sought the Kremlin's help to consummate a real estate deal in Moscow that would make him a fortune. According to the special counsel, hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think it's okay that he concealed it from the public. I don't think it's okay that he advocated a new and more favorable policy towards the Russians, even as he was seeking the Russians' help, the Kremlin's help to make money. I don't think it's okay that his attorney lied to our committee. There's a different word for that than collusion, and it's called compromise. And that is the subject of our hearing today.
5 minutes that succinctly explained the last 3 years. Coming up at the top of the hour, Alex Witt has the latest from the 2020 campaign trail. But first, more AM Joy after the break.